I was standing at the kitchen counter of my small Vietnamese restaurant when my phone rang. It was my son, Marcus. His voice had that sharp, business-like tone I'd been hearing more and more lately. "Mom, I've got great news. I found a buyer for the restaurant. $500,000 cash deal. You can finally retire and go back to Vietnam like you've always talked about. I already signed the preliminary agreement. We close next week." My hand froze on the cleaver I'd been using to slice green onions. 42 years. 42 years my husband Daniel and I had poured into Hazel's faux house here in Little Saigon, Westminster, California. And my son had just sold it with a phone call. "Marcus, we need to talk about this." "Mom, there's nothing to talk about. You're 70 years old. You work 16-hour days. Your arthritis is getting worse. This is the best thing for you. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Trust me, I know what I'm doing." That's what his MBA from USC had taught him, that he knew better than his immigrant mother who could barely speak English when she arrived in America in 1982. "Okay, Marcus, if you think this is best." "I knew you'd understand, Mom. Love you. Gotta run. I have a meeting." He hung up. I stood there in my restaurant, the lunch rush beginning, the familiar smell of star anise and beef bones simmering filling the air. The same smell that had filled this building for over 4 decades. But I took a deep breath and smiled. Because there was something my dear son didn't know, something his father had made sure of before he passed away 2 years ago from lung cancer. My name is Hazel Nguyen. I'm 70 years old, and until that moment, I thought I knew my son. Daniel had died on a Tuesday morning, right here in the restaurant. He'd been preparing the broth for the day, the same routine he'd followed for 40 years, when he collapsed. The paramedics said he was gone before he hit the floor. "Quick," they said, as if that made it easier. After the funeral, Marcus had been helpful. He'd come by twice a week, helped me with paperwork, suggested I see an accountant about optimizing the business. He'd even offered to take over the finances completely. "Mom, you don't need this stress. Let me handle the business side. You just focus on the cooking." At the time, I'd thought it was love. Now I understood it was reconnaissance. The restaurant sat on the corner of Bolsa Avenue and Magnolia Street, right in the heart of Little Saigon. Daniel and I had bought it in 1983, a year after we arrived in America with $300, 2 suitcases, and a 5-year-old Marcus. We'd worked 3 jobs between us, saved every penny, and bought this little corner restaurant that used to be a failed taco shop. We named it Hazel's Faux House. Daniel said my pho was the best he'd ever tasted, even better than his grandmother's in Hanoi. That was the highest compliment a Vietnamese man could give. Over the years, we'd raised Marcus here. He'd done his homework at table 7, the one by the window. He'd bussed tables on weekends, washed dishes during summer breaks. We'd paid for his private high school, his USC education, his study abroad in Singapore. Every bowl of pho, every spring roll, every penny went toward giving him the opportunities we never had. And now he'd sold it all with a phone call. That evening after closing, I went home to the small house Daniel and I had bought in Garden Grove. It was quiet without him. Too quiet. I'd kept everything exactly as he'd left it. His reading glasses on the coffee table, his jacket on the hook by the door, his slippers by the bed. I went to our bedroom and opened the closet. On the top shelf, behind boxes of old photos, was a metal lockbox. Daniel had given me the key 3 days before he died. "Hazel," he'd said, his voice weak from the chemo, "when I'm gone, wait a little while. Then open this box, but only when you're ready, only when you need to." I'd nodded, not understanding, too focused on the fact that I was losing him. Now I understood. I took down the box and opened it with the small key I'd kept on a chain around my neck. Inside were documents. Legal documents, property deeds, bank statements. And a letter in Daniel's handwriting, half in Vietnamese, half in English, the way we'd always communicated, mixing languages mid-sentence. "My dearest Hazel," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it also means something has happened that required you to open this box. I'm sorry I kept secrets from you, but I did it to protect you from worry and to protect our son from his own worst instincts. You know I always handled the business paperwork. What you don't know is that 15 years ago, I separated the restaurant business from the land. The building, the land it sits on, I put it all into a holding company called DHN Properties. D for Daniel, H for Hazel, N for Nguyen. You are the sole owner of this company. Marcus knows about the restaurant business, the Hazel's Faux House LLC, that makes about $80,000 a year profit. What he doesn't know is that we don't lease the land. We own it. And Hazel, that land is worth $8.5 million. The neighborhood has grown. They want to build condos. Developers have called me 20 times. I always said no, but the value keeps going up. I kept this secret because I know our son. He's smart, but he's impatient. He sees money, not memories. He sees an old restaurant, not a family legacy. If he knew we had this much wealth, he would have pressured us to sell years ago. You know our son, Hazel. You know what I mean. Use this information wisely. Teach him what we couldn't teach him when life was too easy. Teach him the value of what we built. I love you forever. Even death doesn't separate us. Daniel. My hands shook as I read. I looked through the documents. Property deed, business incorporation papers, bank statements showing the DHN Properties account, tax assessments showing the land value at $8.2 million, conservative estimate. Daniel had been a bus driver for Orange County Transportation for 30 years. But he'd also been a careful investor, a thoughtful businessman, and apparently a man who knew his son better than his son knew himself. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table drinking tea, looking at the documents, thinking about Marcus. Where had I gone wrong? We'd given him everything. We'd taught him to work hard, to be honest, to respect his elders. But somewhere along the way, between the private schools and the business degree and the corporate consulting job, he'd learned different lessons. He'd learned that old things have no value. That immigrant parents are naive. That tradition is just another word for backwards. The next morning, Marcus called again. His voice was excited. Mom, I talked to the buyer. They want to close faster. How about Friday, 3 days from now? That way you can have the money in your account by next week. I'm thinking you should invest it conservatively. Maybe some bonds, some dividend stocks. I can introduce you to my financial advisor. Marcus, can you come to the restaurant today? We need to discuss this properly. Mom, there's nothing to discuss. The deal is done. I'm doing this for you. You'll thank me later. Please, Marcus, come at 2 o'clock, after the lunch rush. He sighed, the sigh of a busy man humoring his elderly mother. Fine, 2 o'clock. But I only have 30 minutes. I have a call with a potential investor at 2:30. He arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, dressed in his business casual uniform, pressed khakis, button-down shirt, leather messenger bag. He looked around the restaurant the way someone looks at a museum exhibit, something from the past that has no relevance to the present. Mom, you wanted to talk? Sit down, Marcus. Have some pho. When was the last time you ate my cooking? Mom, I don't have time. I need to get back to the office. You don't have an office, Marcus. You work from home. Sit. Something in my voice made him sit. I brought him a bowl of pho, the special recipe Daniel and I had perfected over 40 years. Rare beef, well-done flank, tendon, tripe, the broth simmered for 18 hours with charred onions and ginger. He ate quickly, mechanically, checking his phone between bites. It's good, Mom. You know it's always good. But we need to talk about the sale. The buyer wants to know about any outstanding debts, liens on the property, that kind of thing. Liens on the property, I repeated. Marcus, do you know who owns this property? The LLC owns the building, obviously. Hazel's Faux House LLC, that's what we're selling. And the land? He looked up from his phone, irritated. Mom, I don't understand. The restaurant owns everything, right? That's what the business registration says. The restaurant business and the land are separate, Marcus. The LLC owns the business, the equipment, the name, the recipes, but the land is owned by a different company. His face went pale. What are you talking about? Who owns the land? A company called DHN Properties. I've never heard of it. Mom, who owns that company? Is it some corporate landlord? Do we have a lease agreement? This could complicate the sale. I took a sip of my tea. DHN Properties is owned by me. Your father put it in my name 15 years ago. We own the land, Marcus. We've always owned the land. The silence that followed was long. I watched understanding dawn on his face, followed by confusion, then panic. But that means the sale I arranged, it's only for the business, not the land? That's correct. And the buyer, they think they're getting the whole property? I assume so. That's usually what happens when someone buys a restaurant. Marcus stood up so fast his chair fell backwards. Mom, do you understand what this means? The deal is going to fall through. The buyer is going to sue me. I signed documents saying I had authority to sell. I put my name on contracts. Yes, Marcus, you did. Without asking me. Without checking who owned what. You just assumed. But Mom, I was trying to help you. I thought you just owned the business. I didn't know about any other company. You didn't know because you never asked. You just assumed your old immigrant mother didn't understand business, didn't understand property law, didn't understand anything. He started pacing, running his hands through his hair. Okay, we can fix this. You can include the land in the sale. We'll amend the contract. The buyer will pay more, obviously. This is actually good news. The land is probably worth, what, another $1 million? Try 8.5 million, Marcus. He stopped pacing. He stared at me. What? The land is worth approximately $8.5 million. Your father had it appraised regularly. Developers have been calling for years. They want to build luxury condos. This corner lot, prime location, that's worth much more than an old faux restaurant. Marcus sat back down, or rather collapsed into the chair. 8.5 million. Mom, do you understand what that means? We're rich. You're rich. Why are you still working here, serving pho, killing yourself 16 hours a day? Because this is my life, Marcus. This restaurant is my life. No, Mom, this is your past. With $8.5 million, you could retire. You could travel. You could live like a queen. And what would you do with $8.5 million, Marcus? He had the grace to look embarrassed. I mean, obviously it's your money. But I thought maybe you'd want to invest some of it. I have this startup idea. It's a food delivery app specifically for Asian cuisine. Very niche market, huge potential. With the right backing, we could. Marcus, where is your wife? The question threw him. What? Jennifer? She's at work. Why? Where do you live? Mom, you know where I live. We have the condo in Irvine. Why are you asking me this? How much do you owe, Marcus? His face went red. That's not, Mom. My finances are complicated. I have investments. How much do you owe? He looked down at his hands. About $230,000. Student loans, the startup I tried to launch last year, it didn't work out. Some credit card debt. The condo is mortgaged heavily. But Mom, with your money, with an investment from you, I could turn everything around. There it was. The real reason for the sale. My son was drowning in debt, and he'd tried to sell my restaurant to save himself. Marcus, I'm not going to sell the land. I'm not going to sell the restaurant. I'm not going to invest in your startup. Mom, please. I'm your son. I need help. You need help, Marcus. But not the kind you're asking for. What does that mean? It means you need to learn what your father and I learned when we came to this country with $300. You need to learn the value of work, the value of sacrifice, the value of building something with your own hands. Mom, I have an MBA. I'm not going to work minimum wage jobs. That's beneath me. Those words hung in the air between us. That's beneath me, as if the work his parents had done their entire lives was beneath him. I see. Then you will figure out your debt on your own. I will not give you money. I will not invest in your business. You made your choices. Now you live with them. Mom, you can't be serious. I'm your only child. Family helps family. Family respects family, Marcus. You didn't respect me enough to ask before selling my restaurant. You didn't respect your father's memory, this place where he died doing what he loved. You just saw dollar signs. He stared at me, and I saw something crack in his face. Maybe it was his pride. Maybe it was his self-image as the successful American son of immigrant parents. Fine, he said, standing up. I'll figure it out on my own. I don't need your money. I don't need your restaurant. I'll be fine. He walked out, leaving his bowl of pho half-finished on the table. I didn't hear from Marcus for 3 weeks. In that time, I learned from my friend Linda, who owned the nail salon next door and knew everyone's business, that Marcus's deal had indeed fallen through. The buyer had threatened to sue until Marcus showed them the property records proving he didn't own the land, then they just walked away. Linda also told me that Marcus had lost his consulting contract with his biggest client, that he'd had to sell his Audi, that Jennifer had moved back in with her parents and Marcus was living alone in the condo, which was now in foreclosure proceedings. I waited. I taught my employees. I served my regular customers. I kept the restaurant running the way Daniel and I always had. And I thought about what lesson Marcus needed to learn. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 month after our conversation, Marcus walked into the restaurant. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight. His clothes were wrinkled. He had dark circles under his eyes. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I nodded and brought him to the back office, the tiny room where Daniel used to do the bookkeeping. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and his voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I thought I knew better than you. I thought I was smarter because I had a degree, because I spoke perfect English, because I understood American business, but I didn't understand anything. Tell me what happened, Marcus." And he did. He told me everything. The failed startup that had eaten through his savings, the consulting job he'd lost because he'd been too arrogant with a client, the credit card debt he'd racked up trying to maintain an image of success, the mortgage he couldn't pay, Jennifer leaving because she couldn't trust him anymore. I hit rock bottom, Mom. I'm sleeping on a friend's couch. I have $60 in my bank account. I applied for jobs, but nobody wants to hire me. My resume looks good on paper, but I have no real skills. I realized I've never actually built anything. I've just moved money around, made PowerPoints, given advice, but I've never created anything real. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk until he'd said everything he needed to say. "Mom, I'm not asking for money. I know I don't deserve it. But I was wondering, could I work here? In the restaurant? I'll do anything. Wash dishes, bus tables, whatever you need. I just need a job. I need to start over." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when my son finally understood. "Yes, Marcus, you can work here. Minimum wage. You'll start in the kitchen, washing dishes and prepping vegetables. You'll work the hours I assign you. You'll follow the rules. You'll be an employee, not my son. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mom. Thank you. Thank you so much." He started the next day. I watched him struggle with tasks he'd considered beneath him just weeks ago. Washing dishes for hours, peeling carrots, scrubbing floors, coming home exhausted at the end of each shift. But something changed in him. After the first week, I saw it. He started arriving early. He asked questions about the recipes, about how we sourced ingredients, about why certain suppliers were better than others. He watched how I interacted with customers, how I remembered their orders, their families, their lives. One evening, 2 months after he'd started, I found him in the dining room after closing, sitting at table 7, the one where he used to do homework as a child. "Mom," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you let me fail? You could have told me about the land from the beginning. You could have stopped me before I signed any contracts. Why did you let me go through all of this?" I sat down across from him. "Because you needed to learn something I couldn't teach you with words. Your father and I, we came to this country with nothing. We built this restaurant from nothing. We know what it means to fall and get back up. But you had everything handed to you. You never failed at anything. You never had to struggle. I'm struggling now." "Yes. And what have you learned?" He thought for a long moment. "I learned that work isn't about the title or the salary. It's about creating something, contributing something. I learned that you and Dad weren't just uneducated immigrants running a small business. You were entrepreneurs who built something lasting, something that mattered to people. I learned that I was an arrogant fool who didn't appreciate anything. And I learned that family isn't about money. It's about showing up, doing the work, being there. You didn't give me money, Mom, but you gave me a job when nobody else would. That's real love." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Your father left me that box of documents. He knew someday you might need to learn this lesson. He knew you, Marcus. He loved you enough to make sure I could teach you what you needed to learn. I miss him. I miss him too. But he's still here, in this restaurant, in these recipes, in the lessons we're learning." Marcus worked at the restaurant for 8 months. He learned every position, every recipe, every aspect of the business. He rebuilt his relationship with Jennifer by showing her, not telling her, that he'd changed. He paid off his debts slowly, minimum wage by minimum wage. And then one Saturday evening, I called him into the office after closing. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. Come with me tomorrow. We have an appointment." "An appointment? Where?" "You'll see." The next morning we drove to downtown Santa Ana, to the office of our family lawyer, Mr. Tran, who'd handled our business affairs for 30 years. "Mrs. Wynne, Marcus, please sit down," Mr. Tran said. Marcus looked at me, confused. Mr. Tran opened a folder. "Marcus, your mother asked me to prepare these documents. She wants to explain some things about the family assets." "Mom, what's going on?" I took a deep breath. "Marcus, you know about the land now. What you don't know is that your father was even more careful than I told you. He didn't just separate the business from the land. Over the years, he invested our profits. We own 2 other properties in Little Saigon. We have accounts with 3 different banks. Altogether, our assets are worth about $11.2 million. Marcus's mouth fell open. "And," I continued, "your father set up everything so that when I die, it all goes to you. But there are conditions." "Conditions?" Mr. Tran handed him a document. "Your father's will specifies that you can only inherit if you meet certain requirements. You must work in the restaurant for a minimum of 2 years. You must demonstrate financial responsibility by living debt-free for 1 year. And you must have your mother's approval that you understand the value of what you're inheriting." Marcus looked at me, tears in his eyes. "Dad planned all this?" "Your father loved you, Marcus. But he also knew you. He wanted to make sure you learned these lessons before you had access to real wealth. He didn't want money to ruin you." "And Mom, do I have your approval?" I smiled. "Not yet. You've been working here for 8 months. You have 16 more months to go, and you still have some debts to clear. But Marcus, I see the change in you. I see the man you're becoming. I see the son your father always knew you could be." Marcus broke down crying. Real tears. Not the frustrated tears of a grown man who'd lost everything, but the genuine tears of someone who finally understood what he'd almost thrown away. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve your forgiveness or Dad's trust." "Maybe not. But that's what family is, Marcus. We don't always get what we deserve. Sometimes we get grace, sometimes we get second chances. Your father gave you that gift. He gave it to both of us." 6 months later, Marcus and Jennifer remarried in a small ceremony at the restaurant. He'd completed his debt repayment. He'd proved he could manage money responsibly. And more importantly, he'd proved he understood what really mattered. We didn't sell the restaurant. Instead, Marcus came up with a different plan. He wanted to modernize it, not by changing what made it special, but by honoring it. We renovated the dining room, keeping the original photos of Daniel and me from our early days. We added online ordering, but we trained Marcus to taste test every bowl before it went out, the way Daniel used to do. We called the renewed restaurant Hazel's Faux House, a family legacy. And above the door, we put a photo of Daniel on opening day in 1983, with his arm around me, both of us exhausted and happy and full of hope. Marcus eventually did start his own business, but not the one he'd originally planned. He started a consulting service teaching second-generation immigrants how to honor their parents' businesses while modernizing them. He called it Bridge Builders. And every Sunday, we closed the restaurant for family dinner. Just Marcus, Jennifer, their 2 kids who came later, and me. We'd sit at table 7, the one by the window, and share a meal. Sometimes, I swear I could see Daniel there too, smiling at his son, proud of the man he'd finally become. The land is still worth over $8 million, developers still call, but we're not selling. Some things aren't about money. Some things are about legacy, about family, about the lessons we learn through struggle and grace. That's what Daniel wanted Marcus to learn. That's what I wanted him to learn. And in the end, he did. Did you learn something from my story? Where are you listening from? Let's connect in the comments. If this story touched your heart, you can send a super thanks to help me share more stories like this. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.